Welcome to the Energetic Psyche, a weekly podcast hosted by yours truly, Dr. Adrian Campbell. This week for episode 33, I have Dr. Robyn McCullem with me to talk about her healing journey through emotional abuse and how she is working to create support for others with her organization, Reclaim. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy. So, welcome to the Energetic Psyche, a weekly podcast hosted by yours truly, Dr. Adrian Campbell. This week for episode 33, I have Dr. Robyn McCullem with me to talk about her healing journey and how she is working to create support for others through her organization, Reclaim. So I want to share a little bit about Robyn with you. Robyn's a local dermatologist and the founder of Reclaim, a nonprofit organization that helps women and children recover from emotional abuse. She is a mid-Missouri native and lives in Columbia with her 3 children. When she's not working and attending her kids' activities, you can find her spending time with the many friends she's made in her own recovery journey from emotional abuse. She is an avid learner, interested in understanding everything about trauma recovery. She also has a passion for helping others in the community navigate the sometimes tricky journey of recovering from PTSD. Absolutely. So, Robyn, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Well, thank you for having me. This is very exciting.
Yes, I know. I've enjoyed all of our conversations up until this moment. And as we were just chatting about before we went live, I look forward to continued conversations in the future because I think we have a lot in common. So I'm excited about this conversation tonight. Yeah. So why don't we start with you just telling us a little bit about yourself, like where you grew up, where you came from?
So I am a Missouri native. I grew up in Columbia, and I went to college in Kansas City and came back and did med school in Columbia, did my residency away and came back and started working here in 2008 as a dermatologist down in Jefferson City. And, you know, my story was like, I felt like I had a pretty, like I would say, normal life. I thought it was normal because we always do. It's all we know. But a pretty normal life. Married my high school sweetheart. And about 13 years into our marriage, 3 kids in, I found out that there had been a lot of infidelity and a lot of lying and things like that. And we went through a period of time of really trying to work on it. And he did try to kind of work on his side of things a lot. But ultimately, I was in therapy from as soon as I found out about everything. Yeah. And about two and a half years into it, my counselor was like, why don't we do EMDR? And I was like, sure, I'll do anything. You know, I like to be a guinea pig with my own brain. So I did EMDR. And I think what my therapist didn't really realize, and I didn't really realize, is that I had a lot of dissociation, just meaning like I really wasn't connected with my emotions or my body. And EMDR kind of opens like this channel between the 2 sides of your brain, and you can get flooded with a lot of emotion. And if you're not used to that, it can be very overwhelming. And for me, I was doing okay. And then bam, I just like fell off a cliff and went to a very dark spot. At that point, my husband really wasn't able to support me emotionally. And well, even worse than that. I mean, there was just a lot of manipulation and things going on that I wasn't aware of. But I got worse and worse. And finally, this was probably 5 or 6 years ago, my counselor decided I was not safe to be at home. And I went away to kind of an outpatient type mental health facility just for depression. And while I was there, they had everyone take a class on emotional abuse. And I was like, I mean, whatever, there's no emotional abuse. Nobody's yelling at me. You know, I don't know why I'm taking.
I'm only laughing because like, that's the thing is like so many people who have experienced emotional abuse, including myself.
You just don't know.
Everything's fine and everything's normal. But it's like when veterans joke about like, it wasn't a big deal. And then you share a story and everyone else is looking at you like, that's not okay. And you're
I'm like,
it's not what?
Right. I'm like, oh, there's no emotional abuse after, you know, a very obviously not great relationship that I thought was great, but it was not. There was a lot of stuff going on that I didn't know about. But we took this class on emotional abuse, and there was a couple things they showed us. One was the power and control wheel, which it just kind of lists like ways that people can control you. And I could check off a lot of those boxes, and I was like, oh, we might have a problem. I mean, it was like light bulbs going off. I still can't believe it took me that long to get there. It seems very obvious now, but when you're going through it, it's not, because
right.
When you think somebody is one way for a long time and then all of a sudden you find out they're not, it does take a while for your brain to like catch up to the reality of what it is. It's still kind of stuck in what you thought it was. So,
well, and let me ask you, because I know I experienced this myself, is that I like often our image of what we want things to be or how we want them to be is so strong,
yes,
that we let that like paint over the picture of what's really there and what's really happening. And so it's easier for us to like dismiss stuff or ignore things or whatever, because we have this like concrete idea of like, no, this is what my relationship is. This is what's happening. This is my life, because it's what you want. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there is like a bias, I think, that your brain will pick out things that go towards like what you want or what you're seeing, or
right.
Yeah, what you think is real. And I mean, I'll say like, until I kind of found out about everything, a lot of it was just like, some people are really good liars, and really good manipulators. And if you're a trusting person and don't have any reason not to believe them, I mean, so that part I'm like, okay, I kind of get that. But after I found out, I do think there was a lot of like trying to fit my new reality into what I thought was reality before, which I got to tell you is really confusing. I could use other language for it, but it is very confusing. And sometimes I still have trouble. I'm like, this has been 10 years, like being like, what is real? Because for what was real for so long wasn't. So you don't always trust yourself. But when I went away, I learned about emotional abuse, and so I realized that I did have a lot of that going on in my marriage at the time. And my now ex-husband, he wasn't really at a place where he was able to work on that. And sometimes abusers can, sometimes they can't. I mean,
right.
And so we ended up getting a divorce. But what I experienced after that was just a lot of emotional dysregulation. Like I would say get triggered, which just means something would happen and I would feel like I was overreacting to it. But looking back, I could see, oh, this reminded me of something that happened in the past. And plus, when you have children with somebody, you're still having a lot of interaction with them. So there's, I wouldn't even say like post-traumatic stress disorder. There's just still a lot of trauma going on when that happens with your children. So I've had a long journey, even since coming back from where I was at the center up in Washington. And I will say I would do okay. And then if enough things would happen at once that would trigger me, it's like I just couldn't handle it. And I would just like fall into this pit, you know. And for me, when that would happen, I would really not want to be around, because I would be so overwhelmed, and thinking this was never going to quit and that I would never be able to control my nervous system. And if my nervous system was just like, if all my life is like crawling up out of a pit, you know, just to stabilize for a minute and then falling back in, I mean, that's exhausting and not really a good way to live.
Well, and I also like, when people end up in a space where like they don't want to continue, and I'm going to be blunt and say the word suicide, right? Ideation, suicidal thoughts. It's often because we can't see a way out. Like there is no hope. And so like what you're describing, where it's just, you know, it's just one thing after the other, especially when you've been working on your healing, you've been working on getting better. And then it's just like continues to knock you down. And, you know, I think that's one of the things that, you know, that we were talking about in previous conversations about how like, no, we don't talk about this stuff enough. And we don't talk about how hard it really is to heal from what essentially is what they call complex PTSD versus like regular PTSD. Like there's a difference between the two. And complex PTSD, I mean, PTSD is hard enough to deal with on its own. But complex PTSD can be very confusing and overwhelming.
Yes, it is, because you feel like you don't have control of your own brain and body, really. And you want to, and it's like you know certain things are true, like maybe you know somebody might be trustworthy, but your body, because you've had a lot of lying in the past or things like that, like your body's telling you people aren't safe when they are, or maybe they're telling you they are safe when they're not. I mean, like so it's very confusing to try to navigate. And yeah, you can get to points where you're just so exhausted and you think it's never going to end. And that is a hopeless place to be. Mm-hmm. And I've been there before. So I, while I was going through all of this, I was blessed enough to like kind of start in a support group in my church for women going through similar things. And when I got back from the center, we kind of realized that maybe that the church wasn't the best place for that type of support group. So we decided to move out of the church. And that's when I founded Reclaim. And because I don't think I would have made it through all of this. I mean, I'm almost positive I would not have had I not had support. Like, you have to have people who are there to like validate you. And like, when you can't understand what's going on, other people can see it and they can tell you. Just like you can see it in other people when they can't, because when it's your own brain, it's very confusing. So I just found that the support was like the counseling is very important, but the counseling without support, it's so much harder. Like if you have the support, I just think you can get through it. And especially if you're trying to leave a relationship that is like that. And
it's support of people who have been there and know. Right. Yes. So that when you ask, like, am I crazy? Am I crazy? Like, is this what? Okay, let me tell you what happened. And like, what are your thoughts? They're not going to be like, what is wrong with you? But they're like, yeah, no, go, give it to me.
And they, and like, you'll have friends who really want to help, but if they haven't been through it, you just can't understand why somebody like stays in situations like that. And you hear about this with physical abuse, but it happens with emotional abuse too. Like,
oh, absolutely.
You're like, why is somebody staying if they're getting treated like that? But I mean, there's a lot of brain chemistry involved in keeping you there. Trauma bonding, and
I would almost wonder too if like people in emotional abusive relationships actually stay longer.
Yes,
because they're invalidated, right? Like their trauma is invalidated. Like I had a friend who was in a really emotionally abusive relationship, and I was trying to find her support, and I was calling all these different women's like groups and hotlines and stuff like that. And like, no kidding, they're like, well, if there's no physical abuse, there's nothing we can do. And I'm like, are we still in that age? Like, are we still in that world where we think that's the only thing that matters?
Right. And so that's what I found when I looked in the community. I was like, okay, I mean, if you're getting hit, which is horrible, there is support, because people understand that like a fist, you know, to your face, that's wrong, and you can see it. But the emotional stuff, like, first of all, you don't even understand it half the time. You don't even know it's happening. So then to try to communicate that to somebody else, like people don't get it. And then it also sounds like there's so much that has to do with body language and how things are presented to you by an emotional abuser. So you can relay an incident and it'll sound very innocent, but you don't see all the nuances that went on there. And so like when you're retelling stuff, it makes you feel crazy and petty, that like if people don't understand, right? So I mean, it Reclaim, everybody there understands, and it's not like we sit around and tell our story all the time or anything, but when you come in, like, you'll immediately know, like, these people get it. You don't have to like explain yourself or anything. Like, you can just be who you are and be real. And you're with people who get it and they understand and validate you. And I think, I mean, we learn a lot at Reclaim about boundaries and complex post-traumatic stress disorder and self-care. I mean, we learn a lot, but it's really the connection and the validation that are the actual healing parts. And I've learned enough to know that like those things are actually changing your brain. So it's not just like, oh, you're connecting. No, I mean, it's actually releasing things in your brain that are changing it, that are allowing you to heal. So like, just the connection is a really big deal in the healing process.
A lot of the research that I've done is been associated with community and connection,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
And from a psychology standpoint, like we talk about, like you might have even seen it on like TikTok or Instagram or whatever, but attachment styles, right?
Yep.
And like
Yeah.
we often end up with these attachment styles that develop in our youth. If you had a narcissistic parent, the odds that you're going to end up narcissistic or codependent are very high.
Right.
And then you just repeat those behaviors. So if you're codependent,
Yep.
you're probably going to end up with a narcissistic partner, and they're going to continue to emotionally abuse you like you were as a child. And so these patterns are in place for years and years and years and years of your life, right? It's not
Yes.
just like one relationship. But what is freaking awesome is that there is research now that has shown that those attachment styles can be rewritten by
Right.
healthy new relationships and community, right? And so, yeah, like you're not doomed forever. You're not just, oh, I'm a codependent. It's like, well, is that serving you or not? And if it's not, shake it up. Let's figure it out. Let's change it. Let's fix it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff you read about early on is like, yeah, that it's this, once you're this, you're this, it doesn't change. And that's just not true. I mean, the brain,
I'm like lies.
Right. The brain changes, and
Yes.
it's work because you are having to, like, you have your nerves that are, I mean, super speed because they've been used so often. The connections have been used so often, and you're having to go over and like make new connections that are like turtle speed, like, and it's painful, but
you're literally growing your brain. Like,
yes,
literally growing your brain.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, like at Reclaim, we believe in the brain can change. And we just want to have a space where people can come no matter where they're at in the journey. Like, we do have women who are still married, and that's fine. It's not a divorce group. It's not about that. It's about empowering women to make decisions based on reality, whatever that is. And for some people, that's to stay in a relationship. For some people, it's to leave. It's not about that. It's just about like helping you understand like what's happening, that when you're in a confusing relationship, like relationships really aren't supposed to be that confusing. And I did not really know that. Like, I understand it now, kind of.
Right.
But like, they're not really, they're supposed to be like pretty clear cut. Like, and so if you're in a really confusing relationship, you have to pause and think like, there might be some stuff going on. What the other person might be doing some stuff that's making it that way. So yeah, we just want to empower women to make decisions based on reality and not based on manipulation and lies and things they've been told. And then also help bring people out of isolation, because when you get in these relationships, you tend to get isolated. That's part of how you're controlled.
Yep.
And when you get out of isolation, it brings you power.
Right.
And that's what we want. So there's just not support for people in town, though. So like, we want to get the word out because we've been around a while, but we've told no one. I mean, it's all word of mouth.
Well, like when I stumbled into it, right, looking for podcast guests, I was like, I'm sorry, you do what? Like, that's amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's been a little slow going because I work and I've been trying to do my own recovery, which is a lot, and I have kids. So all that, it's been just really slow, but I think it's been good because we've been able to build a foundation, and we've got a lot of really great women who come, just connecting with them. I mean, I can't tell you how life-giving it is. And even like talking with you on the podcast tonight, I was very tired ahead of time, but like just talking about the stuff and connecting with people, and like, it's very life-giving. It is. It just brings you a lot of hope.
Well, and one of the things I really liked about your center is that, like you said, it isn't just about sitting around and talking about your stories, but you really are working to create a more holistic approach to emotional abuse, and like involving the central nervous system and the brain. So looking at physiology, looking at somatics, and like how people are showing up in the world through their bodies and how that impacts them. And then as well as the like more, we'll say, standard CBT, like talking therapy, right? And support groups. Because when you're going through this big of a, I almost hate to use the words healing journey these days because
Right.
they're becoming so cliche, but I
Right.
mean, it's
It is,
an
though.
adventure, man. So like
Yeah.
when you're going through it, it is so important to like be able to see from all these different areas so that
Yes.
you can understand the different symptoms and you can learn how to take care of yourself in multiple ways, right?
Yes.
Like
I
one of the
mean,
things you said earlier was like maybe yoga is what you need right now. And
yes.
maybe it's not. Maybe yoga is something you're going to need 6 months from now, you know, and maybe
Yes.
right now you need bubble baths and like pedicures, like, you know, and just understanding that there are a lot of different ways for us to care for ourselves and heal.
Yes, I think I'm a real like my personality is just like go at everything 110%.
Mm-hmm.
And with healing from trauma and emotional abuse, that actually is not that helpful because what I didn't understand and I'm just starting to understand is like like what your nervous system can handle is really
Mm-hmm.
small when you first start healing from CPTSD. It just can't handle much, and a lot of stuff will put you too high, and you'll get kind of hyper vigilant, or where you're always looking around for like what's coming next. And if you stay that way too long, then you drop into like you're just done. You know,
Right.
you're laying on the couch in a ball. Um, and so when you push too hard, too fast on your nervous system, you tend to pop out of your window of tolerance and then you're always up and down and that's exhausting. So it really is like going very slowly to retrain your brain. And so you might need yoga for a while, but at first yoga might be too much for your body. Like feeling into your body like that might be too much, which seems so silly to me before I understood it all. I'm like, this is so weird, but it's true.
Especially if you've been dissociating from your body for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just, what we want to do at Reclaim is ultimately have different things for people wherever they're at. So the therapy, we want to have like yoga, massage, maybe acupuncture. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
who knows?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I found in the healing journey, which we did not touch on earlier, but I didn't really like account for how much your physical and your emotional and your mental and spiritual, like how they're all really connected. And I finally got to the point where I was like very physically ill for no reason, really. I mean, there was nothing happening, but I went to a functional medicine doctor
I'm
and
like, oh, but was there?
well, there was. I mean, we tested like my cortisol. It's like out the
Yeah.
roof, right?
Yeah.
Well, that creates all sorts of inflammation in your body. Well, then your brain's inflamed. Well, when your brain's inflamed, you're not really going to be able to do a lot of work healing your brain.
Right.
So, like, you have to actually address all the different components to really
Mm-hmm.
fully heal. And I was like just addressing the emotional, you know, or just addressing the cognitive. And then I kind of got over to the physical, and I think spiritual is probably yet to come. But I'm realizing I mean, we want to offer a place that does address all of it because if you don't, you can't really fully heal.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. Because it's such a it's complex PTSD.
Right.
I'm like, it's so complex because it involves your entire self. So, like, as someone that studies depth psychology, right? My practice is all about the whole self. And so, not just the conscious mind, the brain, our physiology, or even our somatics, but the unconscious mind. And
Right.
so, all of those things that we put aside or we ignore or we try to avoid, they don't actually ever go away. They're
No, they
still
don't.
there, you know?
Yes.
And I can't remember what book this comes from, but it's the quote, the issues are in the tissues, right?
It's
They're,
true.
they're
Yeah.
it's in your body. And so you're going to get somatic symptoms, physiological symptoms based on things that are residing in the unconscious mind that you may have completely dissociated from. And
I
so
mean, you might not
sometimes,
even have memories of it, right? Because when traumatic
seriously,
things happen, you don't
it could
always
be
remember them.
exactly. And so you can actually effectively heal those traumas by working through the body, by
Yes.
working with your dream images, by working in those ways without ever having to rehash it or bring it forward.
Yeah.
Um, the first organization I worked with in regards to trauma that really taught me a lot. It was my first year of grad school, and I did field work with Veterans Yoga Project. I talk about them a lot because I love them with my whole heart and soul.
Yes.
But they taught me about the window of tolerance.
Yeah.
And they teach a class to yoga teachers and other professionals that work specifically with veterans for PTSD called mindfulness-based stress reduction. Or no, not MBSR. Sorry. It's mindfulness. Oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking. Anyways, they have an amazing training. Oh, it's the MYRTT. Okay. Anyhow, they have this amazing training that they put on, and they talk all about trauma and how it shows up in the body and how to heal trauma through the body by strengthening the central nervous system. Right. And so, yes, that window of tolerance. And like you were saying, when you're in trauma, it's small. Right.
Yes.
And so they work to expand the window. So that as you're having those reactions, you're not popping out the top, you're not dropping down the bottom, and you can ride that wave inside of the window. And it's through practices like breathing, just being present. And sometimes it is too much to be in your body, right? And so I love the way they teach, because they talk about like, you don't have to do the yoga, just lay on the mat.
Yes.
Like, just show up and just work to be present.
One day you might be able to do the yoga, and the next day you might not be able to, because maybe stressful things happen at work, right? Like,
healing is not a linear journey.
Right.
Like, that's another thing I think is really, really important.
It is. So it's frustrating, but it's very important to understand.
Absolutely. And sometimes, I mean, especially when you're really working through some shit, it's like you clear one thing and then boom, here's another one. And you clear that and then boom, here's another. And you're like, God, am I there yet? Are we done?
Right.
And it's like, the more you learn to see, the more you see, you know? And so it can become very daunting. So again, I think that's why the support groups like you have are so important, because people understand, you know, it's not like, God, you're not better yet.
Yes.
Which is just so much more frustrating.
I mean, like, and that's the other reason I felt at some points that like I should be better, just by kind of like comments and things people would say, and they weren't meaning to, but I just realized like, okay, this is a long process. And I mean, especially if you're still in contact with your abusive person, like a parent or an ex-spouse or a spouse or a friend, if you're still in contact with them, it draws it out so much more. That's why they're very big on no contact with like narcissistic people, if you can, when you get away, but that's not always possible. So like, you need ongoing support, and that's okay. And like, if these are brain patterns that developed when you're a child, which a lot of times they are, like, I mean, if you had 40 years of that before you realized it, it may take 40 years of working on it. You will get better, but you're going to need support throughout that time. If you don't, it's very easy to revert back to the old patterns. Like,
absolutely. Yeah. And so I would love to share like some specific examples with people, because I think that's another thing about emotional abuse, is that it can be kind of vague. And like, people are, like I said, people are like, I don't really think that I'm being emotionally abused, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I'll just share, this is recent. So I haven't had a relationship with my mother for 14 years. Okay. Long time. But she still consistently crosses boundaries with me. After 14 years.
Right.
And I've tried once to go back into a relationship. It lasted 30 days and it was like, whoop, out. Like, no, it's exactly what it was. And so like, that's emotional abuse, like just crossing a boundary. Like, it seems like not a big deal. And it's exactly what we were talking about before, where like, it's like, am I being irrational? Like, am I being an asshole here? Like, and I was talking to a friend about it, and I said, see, this is one of those things where it's like, if you didn't know me and you didn't know our past, you would be like, gosh, you're an ungrateful daughter, or like, you're really mean to your poor mother, you know, blah, blah, blah. But if you understand, like, one of the things that she did recently was go to my business page on Google and write a review about me.
Nice. Okay.
We haven't had a relationship in 14 years.
Like,
like she doesn't know anything. And it was very nice. It was the sweetest words, right? Like, that's the other thing. so manipulative is the sweetest words, the kindest things that she had to say, but it's totally crossing a boundary. Like it's a dig at me, like, hey, look, I can still touch you. I can still get
Yes.
to you, even
Yes.
though you refuse to have any contact with me. Right.
Yes.
So I think sometimes those are the tricky things that people, they write themselves off. Like, I don't know why I'm getting upset about this. It's not that big of a deal. But it
Yes.
is, and it matters.
Well, and it is a big deal because it's usually part of a pattern. I mean,
Yep.
even if it's not, but it's usually part of a pattern. And I guess what I've really learned myself is like, as I become more in tune with my body, to like really listen to it. And if something's going on, like if I was receiving an apology from somebody, um, which sounded great, but my body was like tight and I felt like I wanted to throw up and run, like, and it was not really at a time when it should have happened. It was like a very public place. And I didn't actually need the apology. So like, I think if I just repeated that, oh, so-and-so apologized, this is what they said, it sounded really good, but my body was telling me like, this is not what it appears.
Yeah.
And so I've just learned to kind of listen to my body more and trust it. And that's been a very long process.
I was just going to say, and that's hard to do when you've been in a really manipulative relationship and you've been lied to, is that's part of the reconditioning, right? Is learning to trust yourself again and like be able to be present with that.
And it's hard because with the PTSD components, I mean, your nervous system does react really big to things,
right,
sometimes that have nothing to do with it, what is happening. And so then you're like, well, how can I trust my body if it's doing that? So it is very hard to kind of figure out. It's not an easy process, but it does get a lot better. I can say that. Like, I mean, compared to a year ago, how I am now, like, I can't even say how much better. And I'm sure in a year or two, it's going to be even better. So, like, there's a lot of hope in the process. Yes, have hope.
Have hope. As long as you're doing the work.
Yes.
And I guess the other thing, too, I'll say is you can take a break. Like, if you need to take a break, if the work is getting too hard or too much or whatever, like, take a break, but get back to it. And as long as you're doing the work, things will get better.
I mean, and the work can be breathing exercises and things like that aren't really like, you don't have to work through all the trauma all the time. But you can always be working to be more present, to feel your body. And you can learn to trust yourself. Like, you can, if you start to respond to what your body's telling you in a way that protects yourself, like, my body's like getting tight right now, I need to get out of here, and you actually do it, like, you'll start to trust yourself because you are protecting yourself and you are listening to yourself, versus for years I would ignore that, that pull to get out, and you basically just stuff yourself away. So so there's a lot of hope, though. It definitely gets better. And it's a long journey, but it's very rewarding too. Like, the friendships I've made and the connections I've made with people. I would say, like, before all this happened, I was probably living life on a very superficial level. I didn't really know it, but I mean, now I can just connect with people so much better. And even people who haven't necessarily had emotional trauma, which I got to admit, most people have, but even ones that have a different kind of trauma, you just have a different level of being able to connect with them. Just realizing that people go through a lot of stuff and there's a lot of hard stuff out there. And that's helped me as a dermatologist immensely. I mean, nothing to do with my skincare, but just connecting with my patients. So there's a lot of good that comes from the journey.
And I would think, and tell me, if you agree or disagree, but like, I don't think our culture really is big on digging into who you are as an individual person.
No.
And at least not, around our age. Nowadays, I think, anyway, it's out there, but I still don't think it's very real. And so sometimes it's the process of healing from our trauma that helps us unearth who we really are. And allows us to connect to that authentic part of us, which allows us to show up in the world that way. And then gather the people around us who are also showing up that way,
Yes. Yes, and that is another thing about the healing journey. You know, you don't realize it, but you have probably the one relationship that has triggered you on all of it. But then all of a sudden, when you start learning about the different things with emotional abuse or manipulation, not everybody is abusive, but there is a lot of manipulation out there. And people do use a lot of tactics to get what they want that aren't always very healthy. Then you'll see it in other relationships, and you'll realize that there might be a larger thing at play than just this one person.
Well, and I think
you,
and just to talk about like the people who perpetrate this stuff, right? Because I mean, I've done it myself without noticing because it was modeled to me. And I think that a lot of the times the people who are inflicting emotional abuse or being manipulative may not even realize that they're doing it. It's not always like, and I think that's another reason people don't realize what's happening is because we have this like altered view of what the bad guy looks like, right? Like it has to be somebody that's like, oh, I'm gonna troll your life and take you away in a dungeon, and like that's not always the case.
No.
Like, they could have this, they could actually be like a genuine good person, but also be like very manipulative when they want something because that's how they were taught to move through the world.
Right. I mean, we do what we were modeled.
Right.
I think what we've kind of discussed a lot in group is maybe the big tell is when you go to somebody with a concern or a boundary about how they've treated you or what they've done, it's really how they react. So like if you're with somebody who is willing to grow and change, and they care about you, they're gonna react with concern, and they'll probably actually try to change to some level. I mean, it might be hard, but you're gonna see some effort there. If you're with somebody who's kind of further along on the it's all kind of a spectrum, right? Further down on the spectrum, they're gonna have more trouble changing, and they're gonna be less willing to, and they're probably gonna like blame you and turn it on you.
Well, and if their actions are serving them,
I mean,
why would they change?
Right?
Right?
Yes. I mean, and it does. They get a lot from it. I mean,
and I want to back up for a second because I said, good person. I don't actually think there's good people versus bad people. I think there's just people, and so I just wanted to retract that statement. As soon as I left, I was like, oh, I didn't. That's not what I meant to say. But yeah, because they're not good or bad, right? But I think what you're saying is like when you go to them with something and how they respond to it. It really is because we all get to choose how we're going to show up every day.
Right.
Yep. We get to choose. And sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes it's easier.
Right.
But even the people who are like, we'll say unconsciously manipulating somebody, if you go to that person and you say like, so I'm Italian. Okay. My grandmother, I had so many conversations with her when I'd say, sorry, didn't pack my bags for this guilt trip. Like, I'm not going on it today, right?
Yes.
And it took a lot of years to get to that point where I was like, we don't do this. No. And for many, many years, I didn't hold boundaries. I didn't even try. When I started, there was a lot of pushback.
Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah. And then towards the end, when I was really firm, it was like, I've had conversations with multiple people that are like, I don't understand why you need me to be this way with you. I don't understand why this is a problem, but I love you and I want to be in relationship with you.
Right.
So I'm not going to do that to you, or I'm not going to be this way with you. And I think that's really important. Like you were saying, it's how they respond to it.
Yes, that is like a huge thing. And we also kind of get stuck. I think a lot of women coming in as like, well, is he a narcissist or not? Because if he's a narcissist or they're a narcissist, then it's okay if I leave, or it's okay, And the fact of the matter is, if like somebody's behavior towards you is problematic to you for whatever reason, like, and they're not going to change it, then it's okay to not be around them. Like, they don't have
to have a label.
Narcissist. And it might just be that their trauma has created things in them that doesn't work with your trauma. You know, like they might be perfectly good with somebody else, but like it just might not be good for you, and that's okay.
Right.
Like I think that was like a huge thing, like just realizing, hey, it's okay. If this isn't okay with me, maybe it would be fine with the next person, but it's not working for me and my nervous system. So it's okay to like say no and not be around that person or put up a boundary or whatever.
Absolutely.
I don't have
You
to
don't have to get
justify it
permission.
or validate it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't have to get permission from everybody around you before you
No.
make a decision for your own well-being
Yeah.
and care. Like I said, it all comes down to like, is this working for you or not? And if
Right.
it's not, like, let's look at the problem and let's make some changes, you know, where we can. Let's figure out where we have
Yes.
power and let's shift stuff.
Yes. And I also like, I thought like for me, like I'm very loyal and I would hold on to every relationship, like, and try to make it work, like to the end, like way past when it was good for me. and I guess now I've realized like when somebody who is not good for me, maybe a toxic person or just not good for me, leaves, that's actually a blessing. Like I would feel it as rejection before, and now I'm like, okay, that frees up space for people who are healthy and safe for me. And that has been a really big shift. But again, these things take a lot of time.
I was just gonna say that it takes a lot of growth.
I mean, this has been like 10 years.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've been working hard the whole time,
Right.
like no breaks for me. But so yeah, you make these shifts though, and it's funny because you'll hear something multiple times, and then all of a sudden it'll like click, and you'll be like, oh, and like it'll be real to you. But
Yeah.
you may have heard it 10 times for 4 years before that, but you just weren't ready or at the right place for it. And that's just how it goes in the journey.
Well, and you know, one of the other things I think that's really important to talk about too with CPTSD, and let me just, because we've been saying it a lot, but we haven't broken it down. So there's the two big names out there, words that we're using is like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and CPTSD, C as in Charlie, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And the big difference is PTSD is usually based on a one-time event that's occurred, whereas complex PTSD is often multiple events that have taken place over time. And often people with complex PTSD, they can have similar symptoms to people with PTSD, like the hypervigilance, flashbacks, nightmares, avoidance. But some of the symptoms that don't fully cross or are more heightened in complex PTSD is the emotional regulation or affect regulation, like we've already talked about, right? Having mood swings, being impulsive, crying out of nowhere or over like little things, having overwhelming feelings where you're like, oh my God, I'm totally overreacting to this. And it's because your complex PTSD is being triggered, right?
Right.
And another really big one, and we've also talked about like difficulty with new relationships and being able to trust ourselves and others and things like that. But what we haven't talked about yet is issues with identity and sense of self.
Yes.
And I think that like that is probably, from what I've seen and experienced, one of the biggest barriers to doing the work, because you have an altered sense of who you are and you have an altered perception of the perpetrator, right? Like they're trying to protect me. They're not doing anything wrong. Like, yeah, your husband doesn't treat you like that, or your boyfriend doesn't treat you like that, but that's because he doesn't care about you as much as mine does, you know, or he tells me I look shitty in these outfits because he wants to make sure I look nice. And so we make all these excuses for whoever might be perpetrating the emotional abuse because our sense of self has been altered and we don't see ourselves for who we really are.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is one of the hardest things about sort of complex PTSD and complex relational trauma. Is just, your sense of self just gets eroded away into almost nothing. And your self-trust. Like
I was just going to say there's lack of trust.
Yes.
guilt and shame start to come up and be a problem,
Yes.
especially when you start trying to see the truth
Yeah.
or you start trying to pull away. It's, am
Yes.
I doing the right thing? Am I a terrible person? And
So
I feel
you'll have like all sorts of guilt when you
yeah,
first start seeing it, because you feel like you're betraying this person that you are bonded with, really.
right, right,
And then you'll feel guilt as you pull away, because, well, they'll say a lot of things that make you feel really guilty and
yeah,
make. I literally felt like my divorce was my fault, despite everything that had happened in our relationship. I mean, like, I knew it wasn't, but my body felt like it was.
yeah,
Everybody, my kids, I mean, like, everybody felt like it was my fault, even though it wasn't being said.
right.
So then there's that guilt and shame. And then as you get a little further out, you have this like shame about the fact that you stayed in something a long time. And you're like, how could I do that? Do I not love it? Have any self-respect?
Yeah.
Then
Or
you
how
have
did I
shame
not
about
see
that.
it? How did I
Or
not see it for so
yes,
long?
how did
Especially
I
when
not
other
see
people
it?
tell you, like, you didn't know that was going on. Like,
You're
that
like,
was so obvious. Like, how did you not
no.
see that that person was lying to you? And you're like, what?
No.
Yeah.
Or then shame about like you get pulled back into like the emotional stuff with that person. And then you're like, it happened again. So you get that kind of shame and guilt. So like there's just so many levels of it that
Mhm.
you have to work through. For me, what's really been helpful, and I'm an information person, is like learning about the brain science behind it, and just learning that like, no, these are like, when you say complex PTSD, it is an actual, I say brain damage, not in like a bad way, but like your brain has been altered.
Right.
Just like if you had surgery on something, an automobile accident, and you had to have surgery or whatever, like it's been altered. There's an injury there that's real. This is not just you
Right.
thinking wrong, or like something's
It's not
wrong with
just your
you.
emotions.
Not just your emotions.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there are structures in your brain that are changed from this.
Right.
And it can happen in one event, or it can happen in many, many, many events. Like we call it death by paper cuts, right?
Yeah.
Like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Like everything seems so small, but when it adds up, it's changed your brain. And so you have to do things to change your brain to a healthier way, and you
Right.
can do them.
Yes.
But it
Yes.
took the shame away for me when I realized, okay, this is how any normal brain would react if put in this abnormal, stressful situation. Like anyone's brain would do this. It's not
Right.
just mine.
Right.
So
Yeah. Dr. Dan Libby, who's the founder of Veterans Yoga Project, I've heard him say on many occasions, your brain is having a normal reaction to a very abnormal situation.
yes,
Like what
yes,
you're experiencing is not normal, and your brain is having a normal reaction to it. Like there's
yes.
nothing wrong with you.
No, your brain is reacting to protect you, basically.
Right.
And that's what a lot of your symptoms are coming from. Um, when it becomes the post traumatic, afterwards, um, it's still reacting to protect you, because your brain, I mean, that's the first thing, that's the first job of your brain, right? Is survival. And
Mhm.
it doesn't really recognize a difference between physical threat and emotional threat.
Mhm.
And our human brains are wired for connection. And so when we think a connection is going to be severed, it's going to trigger survival parts of our brain. And that's where you're getting a lot of the symptoms of the emotional dysregulation, the hypervigilance, things like that.
Well, because if you've been in this relationship for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, I mean, like the example I
Yeah,
gave of one of my issues with emotional abuse was my mother, right? So, like,
right,
since I was born,
right.
um, that has been programmed into your head, especially with a parent. It's not only like friends and family, but culturally, this is your safety. This
Right.
is who is supposed to take care of you. And you are pulling away from that. Like you're severing the connection that is your safety and security in this world.
Yes.
And, so absolutely, there parts of you are going to respond in a way that's like, wait, what are we doing? What are we doing? Like, is this really the best thing for us? Like, are you sure?
Right. Right. I mean, it feels like life and death,
And
which
then
is,
when it's hard afterwards, all of
yes.
those parts are validated, right? Like, see,
Right.
I told you you shouldn't have left. I told
Yes.
you. Yeah.
And that's another thing, is it is always hard afterwards. Like I
Yeah.
haven't seen anybody where it's not hard afterwards.
Mhm.
However, it is so much better. You don't realize like the brain fog that you get, like, and the amount of energy you were putting into like surviving in that relationship and making it work till you're out of it for a while. And like when I first got out, I like went through physical withdrawal. I would have night sweats for like months.
Man.
Like, so, I mean, it was like a physical thing. It's real. Like this whole bonding, trauma bonding, all of it's real. And it's a lot for your brain to go through to get out of it. And it's really hard to do alone. So,
well, and just even like moving past the constant anxiety that you had, right? Like every time, let me think of an example. Like, let's say that your spouse expected you to have dinner ready every day at 6:00. Right. You could be separated from them for 2, 3, 4 years, and at 6:00 still get a boost of anxiety.
Absolutely.
Right?
And not
because
even
it's programmed into your central nervous system and in your brain.
Right. Yeah. And you may not even realize that that is happening. Right. But you just, you're more anxious all of a sudden. And like, I found like also it's not always the other person or other people. Like it'll just be a thought I have. Like I'll have just one little thought and then all of a sudden I'm triggered. I'm like, oh, my own brain's triggering me now. I mean, like it's very frustrating, but
can you just not think about these things anymore?
I know.
That would be great.
I mean, and then you're kind of like, then you're hyper vigilant about being triggered. So you're like, well, when's the next trigger going to come? You know, what's going to happen? Like, and so it gets kind of ridiculous. I mean, it really does. But, but it gets better. And there are things you can do to calm your nervous system down.
And let me ask you, so I know sometimes for me, as being on the back end of, I mean, I've had a couple emotionally abusive relationships, right? Not just one. Yay, me.
I know. I know. Right. Yes.
So like being more on the back end, though, of most of them, like taking things with a grain of salt, having a little bit of a sense of humor, injecting grace has been really helpful. So like I kind of saw it in you when you were like, gosh, here comes one of those thoughts again, right? Where I'll like, you know, I'll notice I'm getting anxious instead of being like, oh my gosh, like what's happening? It's like, okay, let's take a breath. What's freaking us out now? You know, like, what reminded me? What's happening? You know, like okay, what were we just thinking? I found that that's made it a lot easier to inject a little humor and some grace, you know, that like
grace is huge. Yeah. Yes. Because I mean, you're not meaning to have those reactions, right? This is like this stuff happens in your brain. It's not even going up to your thinking brain. This is all happening in the back of your brain. It's subconscious, really. And so you can learn to make it conscious by learning to listen to your body and then like being curious about it and figuring out what it was that triggered you. Being curious is like a huge thing that is a new concept to me. But it has really changed things a ton. Instead of like judging a feeling as it comes up, which is what I usually do, I am starting to be curious and be like, okay, this is coming up. What is it telling me? Because it's telling me something.
That's one of my like main like quote statements, whatever, with anyone I work with, any workshop I give, curiosity over judgment. It'll change your life.
Yes, it does.
It'll really change your life.
And it actually does when you're working with other people too. Like if somebody does something, instead of judging what they're doing, you can be curious about it and be like, I wonder if there's something behind that. Maybe something's going on with them. You know, like we make a lot of assumptions in ourselves and others.
And it takes stuff that you would normally put right on you and it allows it to stay with them.
Yes.
Right? Like I wonder what's going on with that person instead of I wonder what I did to make them act that way.
Oh, absolutely. And I will say almost universally, the women who come in think everything is their fault.
Right.
I mean, I think a lot of the people that they're with think everything is other people's fault. So, you know, we naturally get together with people like that sometimes. So learning to be curious has been a huge thing too.
So Robyn, we are just about at time. So I want to talk about your organization specifically. Like you're 4 years old. Your organization's 4 years old. So it's just a little baby in the nonprofit world, but you've had a lot of successes. You have some great things going on. And I know you have big plans for the future, right?
Yes.
So what are you currently offering for people right now?
Well, right now we are offering, we have a weekly support group for women who have been in, you know, confusing relationships, whether they be abusive or just confusing. And it doesn't have to be a spouse. It could be a child, a parent, a friend. It doesn't matter. And so we meet once a week for that. And that's been going on a while. It's a great group. You don't have to come every week.
Local in Columbia, Missouri.
In Columbia, Missouri, yes. Okay. We may start a Zoom group because we actually get about half of our calls are out of state because there's not a lot of support for people. Yeah. And they're finding our website, and my heart is feeling like we need to help them too. So we are maybe trying to start a Zoom group, but right now we just have the in-person group. Okay. We are going to start a group for people who have experienced betrayal trauma this fall. So that's going to get going. That'll probably be on a weeknight. And that's led by a gal who's had experience in that area, and she's had a lot of coaching experience there too. Okay. So she's been through several programs for that. And then we do various groups throughout the year that might be like 4 to 6 weeks during the week. I've done it before on, complex trauma in the brain, internal family systems, which is just a type of counseling that is helpful for trauma. Mm-hmm. And we've done it on emotional manipulation tactics. Right now, we're going to have one on basically kind of an art way to express yourself with art. Mm-hmm. We're going to bring in different modalities and just let people kind of express the different parts of themselves, because we all have different parts, and put that into a picture of some sort. So we're going to do that this fall. So those are kind of the 3 things we've got going this fall, but it is always changing. We always have new things as far as groups going.
So how can people find information on this and connect?
Yes, reclaimme.org is our website. Okay. So it'll give general information, but basically, if you're interested, we just fill out the form or call the number. And our intake coordinator is awesome. She'll get in touch with you and just kind of talk with you. And mostly, we just want to make sure, like, if you come to our group, that it's the right fit for you. Sometimes there are things like that you may need more of a therapist-led group. Ours is just a member-led group. Mm-hmm. So there are some things that it may not be the group for you. We just want to make sure it's a good fit if you're interested in the group. We also have several counselors in the Columbia area that we know have training in trauma. Mm-hmm. Not all counselors do. So it's really important that they understand like the body component of trauma and things like that, like we talked about. And so we can set up referrals for that if people are interested by calling our number. Awesome. And we do have a scholarship available for counseling for women who have experienced this type of trauma. So again, just going through our contact page, if you're needing a scholarship, we would just kind of talk with you about that and go from there. But it's all through our website.
And then I'm just going to plug you for fundraising and funding. So yes. Robyn needs help. If you're watching this, if you're listening to this, please consider donating to her organization. Like I said, they're only 4 years old, but they've had a very strong start, and she has some really amazing programs she wants to bring forward. So on top of what you shared, I know you also want to like continue giving these scholarships for therapy, because like as we talked about, this type of healing is very difficult and it's very expensive to actually be able to do it. So for you guys to offer people scholarships for therapy, I think is so important, because they're able to get to the therapists that have the training that they need versus going to some low cost clinic therapists, which no offense, y'all, I love you. But they're not always trained at the level that this type of healing is required. Right. So the scholarships for that. I know you've also talked about wanting to do scholarships for these people who have survived emotional abuse to go through skill training, not only to empower them, but to help them give back, because a lot of them want to turn around and help other women. So scholarships to help them go to coaching programs or specialized trainings and things like that, which I think is great. And then I also know that you want to hopefully expand this to include a men's group in the future.
We do. Yes.
Yeah,
We
which I
do.
think is really important because men experience this too. It's not just women.
I mean, I think they might be the most underserved population, even more than women, because for multiple reasons in our society. So, yes, we would like to help the men too.
Yeah. And then, of course, you have administrative costs and just general funding. So, like I said, if you're listening or you're watching and you would like to help Robyn's organization with supporting people moving through emotional abuse, please connect with her via her website, reclaimme.org, and I'll make sure that that is with this post as well.
Yes.
So, yeah.
We have big plans. So, we want to help the whole community heal from trauma. It's kind of rampant everywhere, and it's messing a lot of things up. So I think we want to help people heal and be whole. So, yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, Robyn. So we're pretty much at the end, and I always ask everyone at the end if there was one thing you could share or wanted to share with anyone that's listening or watching, what would that be?
I mean, I would say, like, at this point, if you're a woman and you're in a confusing relationship, like, you need support. It's so intimidating to come in the first time, but once you come, you will realize, like, just being known and validated without even having to say anything. I mean, it is so important. So, we're here. We want to hear from you. Just go through our website, and we'd love to have you.
Awesome. Thanks, Robyn. I appreciate you, and I appreciate the work you're doing very much.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a good conversation.
I know. I think we could talk for hours more.
I think we could.
Well, we're going to. We'll connect after this, and we'll see where that takes us.
Sounds good.
All right. Say good night. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Energetic Psyche, a weekly podcast that live streams every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you will join us again in the future. Have a wonderful week.